Alright, welcome to my third kitchen in 3 videos. It's been a crazy few weeks, but I should be settling in here for a few weeks, a few months. I don't know what's going on, to be honest. And today I wanted to cover something very important because I've been seeing so many people making bread, just cooking in general. If there's one good thing about the coronavirus, it's more people have time to cook, or more people are home and they can dedicate time to making food from scratch. And there's no food you can make more from scratch than bread. You're taking yeast, flour, and water, and salt, and you're making magic with those ingredients. And so many people have been tagging me on my Instagram at Life by Mike G, and it's been amazing to see your bread progress, how many people are getting into sourdough for the first time. I love seeing those bread pics in my inbox, but unfortunately I can't answer all your questions. A lot of people are asking me troubleshooting questions about sourdough, and it's just too much. And it's also the reason why I make these videos and why I made a whole course on sourdough bread to answer these exact questions. But today I wanted to do something different because I had to move out of my apartment in like a day, and I packed my car full to the brim, and I couldn't fit any of my sourdough equipment, including my sourdough starter. So I wanted to do a complete tutorial showing you how you can make sourdough bread, 1, without a sourdough starter, so we'll be making that from scratch, and 2, without any standard sourdough baking equipment. So generally when you're making sourdough, you want a scale, you want a Dutch oven to bake it in, you want a bread lame or some type of really sharp scoring blade. You definitely want a proofing basket or a banneton. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I use. There might be like a few little things that I have back in the studio that come up, but I don't have any of that equipment, which I thought was a bummer at first, but then I realized there's probably so many beginners out there that are getting into sourdough that can't go to the store right now that want to at least attempt something at home. So this video should be a great gateway into seeing if you want to invest in some stuff. If you try it, you like the progress, then you want to invest to make really good sourdough, but hopefully we'll at least get some pretty good sourdough today. So unfortunately, my sourdough starter did not make it from Brooklyn. It is sitting in my studio fridge right now, potentially dying a very slow and cold death. But the truth is, I have sourdough starters die on me, from time to time. It's really not that big a deal. People think a sourdough starter needs to be passed on from generations, or you need to buy it online, but they are so easy to make. All you're doing is mixing flour and water together, and you're creating the perfect colony for yeast and bacteria to thrive. There's yeast and bacteria all over your house. We're made up of yeast and bacteria, and by mixing flour and water together, you're creating the perfect place for those to really thrive and colonize and multiply. So all you have to do to start your starter off is mix flour and water. So I'm gonna take a clean jar and add a few scoops of flour and a little bit of water to create a mixture somewhere around a pancake and a cake batter, and just let that sit for 24 hours.
This is after 1 day. You can already see some bubbles. It's liquidy right now, which is fine because it's sitting for 24 hours, totally natural. So what I'm gonna do is not discard anything. I'm just gonna feed this with just a little more flour and a little more water and just let that go for another 24 hours. All right, just woke up. This is day 3. You can see a ton of bubble activity, but when I smell it, it's still not sour, and that's totally natural. We're building a colony of yeast and bacteria, which are gonna keep developing those sour notes, but that's the last thing that's gonna come. Probably a week down the line, you'll start smelling more of the sour notes, but it's good that at least we have the bubble activity. We know there's something forming right now, so I'm just gonna keep on feeding this thing.
Check this out. This is day 4 of my starter. People think it's tough to make a starter at home. Did you see how easy it was?
Super bubbly, super fluffy. It rose by at least double. You can see all those carbonation bubbles in there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove half of this and then feed it again. And then I'll start doing continual feedings twice a day. And I'm starting to get sour notes too after 3 days, which is a great sign. So I think in maybe 2 days,
I'll be ready to bake. So less than a week, we could have sourdough bread. If you've seen any of my other sourdough videos, you know I don't like wasting extra starter. You don't need to throw it in the trash. This is good fermented dough right here. Oh wow, that just deflated, like that was crazy. So oil, scallions, a little bit of sesame seeds, and salt. So now that this is emptied into the pan and frying, I can just do a regular feeding on this. All right, all fed. Now check this out. Ready for crispiness? What? The best right there. The absolute best. All right, today is the day. I've been feeding this thing for about a week since I've gotten here, and it's been pretty active over the last few days. And it's the weekend, even though there really aren't weekends at this point in life, but it feels like the right time to make bread. So what I'm gonna do is feed this thing. I'm gonna pour about half of this off, make another pancake, and give this thing a solid feeding and just let that activate for a few hours. All right, so you can see in there's some bubbles. I've left about, I would say that's half a cup of starter. You can leave less, you can leave more. In total, I need about 150 grams, which might be around a cup of active starter. And I've been doing this for a while, so I can eyeball something around there, but you know, you're just trying to get close. Just so you can see, that is my final consistency right there. Really thick pancake, like cake batter consistency. So a lot of you have already been taking advantage of my sourdough checklist schedules right here. I'm gonna be using the Flex Bake today. This is the weekend one or the freelance one when you have time when you're home, and most of you are home, so this is great for right now. But I do have 4 other checklists for all different types of schedules, so you can click this link right here or this link to get your free checklist PDFs. But let's take a look at this. So we just fed the starter. This says 8 a.m. and actually it's 7:45, so we're pretty much right on schedule there, which is great. Now, generally a starter takes 4 to 7 hours to activate, and I know that's a big time frame, but this is fermentation. It depends on the temperature in your house, the activity of your starter. The next step is auto lease, so we have a good chunk of time in there. So I'm gonna go for a little run, get out of quarantine, and I'll put a rubber band on the sourdough starter and put a time lapse on there, and we'll see what happens over the next few hours. Check that out. Pretty solid right there. Nice and bubbly. So right now it's 10:36, which is pretty much on point with, well, we're a little behind. I think this activated a little quicker, and always use your senses. Smell it, look at it, check for rounding on the top of the starter before you just start following instructions, because every environment is completely different. So now we're gonna auto lease the bread for about 45 minutes or an hour, and then this will be perfectly ready to go for our dough. So when it comes to baking sourdough bread, a scale is your best friend, especially when it comes to getting specific with baker's percentages. In this case, I don't have a scale, but I do feel like every baker should know how to make sourdough from feel. And it's great to have specific measurements in the beginning, but over time you will get used to the feel of things, the look of things, and you can basically hone in on hydration levels of your dough just by looking at it, just by feeling it. And that's of course what we're gonna be doing today. I'm gonna be giving you cup measurements and the ounce conversion just as a guide for all the beginners out there if you need a reference point. And at this stage, we are auto leasing our dough, which is just starting the gluten bonding process, you want to do it at least 45 minutes before you add your starter to the dough. And the measurements I'm going to go with for my sourdough bread is 3 cups of all-purpose flour and then 2 cups of whole wheat. So I'm going to do a nice mix of both whole wheat and all-purpose. And then for the water, I'm going to go with just about 3.5 cups of water.
You can see that that is way too wet. I would not want to deal with that dough. That's almost like a cake batter. We're looking for something in between like a pizza dough and a cake batter, right in the middle. So I'll probably just add 1 more cup of all-purpose flour and see where that gets me. All right, there we go. So that is much better. I would say that's around 75 to 80% hydration if I had to guess. And this will break down to 2 sourdough loaves. And you can see it's super sticky right now. But remember, that's the point of this auto-lease process. Over the next 45 minutes, as the gluten proteins start to bond together, this dough will start to transform over time. So we've auto-leased for 45 minutes and I just want to show you, now we're ready to add this starter. You can see it's sort of doming up. Can you see that? Let me get a better view. There you go. It's slightly rounded on top, which is a good sign that our sourdough is still activating. Once it starts deflating and it starts going concave, right? That's the word, concave. Starts going down, that means your sourdough starter is running out of food and you want to add it to your dough before it runs out of food. All right. You can see texture starting to change. Already a little smoother, already less sticky. So let's go in with the salt. Just eyeballing this. You always want more salt than you think when it comes to bread. It's not just like a few pinches. It's a little more aggressive. Just fold that in real quick. Now our starter. And for this, it's just like a glob. It's the best way I can describe it. That was probably about 150 to 200 grams, which is what you're going for. And now what we're gonna do is just fold in our starter. And the dough is already feeling so nice. Which is a good sign that we got our hydration levels right. Okay, we'll let that sit for about 30 minutes and we'll start the stretch and fold process. All right, so we are entering into the stretch and fold process. And when you're making sourdough bread, you're not kneading it like normal bread because you want to keep that air in your bread so you get those nice bubbles. So over the next 2.5 hour period, we're gonna be just gently stretching the dough and folding it over, stretching and folding it over, just like this motion. You just wanna do it a few times till your dough starts to almost tighten up. The gluten's gonna tighten up a bit. That's when you know, okay, we're ready to let this dough rest for another 45 minutes, then we'll go at it again. All right, round 2. All right, round 3. Fight. Texture's starting to get a little nicer. You can feel it. Just a little more supple, you could say. All right, round 4, final stretch and fold. I just want to show you something real quick. This is called the window pane test. If you stretch out the dough, see that? See how far I can stretch it out? It's a good sign if you can stretch it super thin, like you can almost see through it. It's a good sign that the gluten is well developed. So getting the proper bulk rise is something that people mess up a lot. I would say it's one of the trickier parts to, oh, check this out, hold on. Tahini swirled sweet potato brownies. Maybe one day you'll get that recipe.
Back to the bulk rise. So yes, people get this wrong a lot. They don't give the dough proper time to bulk rise because a lot of recipes will tell you, 3-4 hours. You can see on this sheet, I say 2 to 6 hours. And right now in here, it's a little cooler, and even a temperature change of 2 or 3 degrees could totally slow down your bulk rise by an hour or two. So it's really something that you have to look for. And I'm just going to keep an eye on this every hour, see how much it's rising. We're not trying to get this to double in size. This isn't baker's yeast, but we do want to gain some volume. We want to see an airiness to the dough, and overall it will feel a little more substantial, will feel fluffy. And if it's late at night, you could totally just throw this in the fridge now and let it bulk rise in the fridge overnight slowly, and then roll it out in the morning, which is totally fine. So you can adapt, and that's what the schedules are for. I kind of give you the methods for adapting with whatever timings you're dealing with in the moment.
All right, so check that out. Look at that jiggle. It's been, how long has it been? Been a good 4.5-5 hours, but I really wanted to give it some time to develop, and you can see it just has like a voluptuousness. You feel that? Do you see that? I can feel that, all right? It just has a jiggle to it. It's super smooth. A lot of people underproof at this point because they're used to baker's yeast doubling in like 1 hour, and this just takes so much longer. So just make sure you give it some time. But we're ready to move on to the shaping process. So we're gonna pre-shape these, let them sit for about 20 minutes, and then do the final shaping. All right, obviously I don't have any type of scraper, but look, that removes pretty nicely. Okay, so I'm just gonna delicately chop this in half to make 2 loaves. A little dusting. So this is just a quick little pre-shaping. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, boom. 1, 2, 1, 2, boom, boom, flip. So while those are bench resting, it gives us a chance to discuss what we're gonna do about proofing these things, since we don't have the classic Benetton that most sourdough bakers use. And there's a pretty easy solution to this, which is just taking a bowl. I found 2 bowls that I think will be a pretty good size. Obviously, I can only make a bowl style loaf, like a round loaf. So I don't have an oval bowl, but maybe you can troubleshoot that at home. And once you find your bowls, I'm just gonna take a tea cloth. I've got a thinner tea cloth here, and just line this thing. And then what I like to do for these is just take a wire strainer and just gently coat all the sides with some flour.
I can already tell not having a bench scraper when rolling these is slightly more difficult, but it definitely can be done. And I think what I'm gonna do is I'll just use this thing. It's not far off a bench scraper. So the idea of a bench scraper is you can kind of collect dough and scrape it off with like a thin metal piece, which is much more non-stick on sticky dough compared to your fingers. So I might use this in the final shaping. And then to add a ton of flavor and to help with the non-stick, I'm just gonna throw a bunch of sesame seeds on this plate and some poppy seeds. We'll do a little mix. Fold, and then kind of just turn it up on itself, turn it in, and now start pulling, tension pulls. You're pulling and tucking it under itself while getting the surface nice and tight like this. Getting a little sticky. All right, now we will dip it in. All right, so the bread is in. The last step is just going around and making sure as this expands, it doesn't stick to the wall. You add some sesame seeds, and you can also add some flour, and that will just make it more non-stick as it proofs. When I push in, boom, it springs right back. Doesn't leave a dent because it's not
proof. So the final step before we bake this is we're gonna wrap these up and we're gonna put them in the fridge and proof them overnight. Now you could proof these at room temperature for 2-3 hours until they're ready for the oven, but because it's late, I don't wanna wait for that. And also by slowing down the proofing in the refrigerator, you're gonna be developing more flavor in your loaves, a better color. So I'm always a big fan of the overnight proof. I also like proofing them overnight because it's a great feeling going to bed knowing you're waking up and baking sourdough bread. Something about it is very natural. I feel like a real baker waking up early and getting those things in the oven.
When it comes to baking sourdough at home, most people use a Dutch oven, something that looks like this to mimic a proper baking oven for two specific reasons. One, they're super thick, so they can retain a lot of heat. All of that thermal mass gets absorbed into the metal, and then when you put your bread on it, it gets transferred to the bread, which helps with the spring. Also, by having a lid on the Dutch oven, when the bread bakes and releases steam, you're trapping in the steam, helping with the oven spring and also helping with the color of the bread. And a proper baking oven injects steam into the oven as you bake, but unfortunately I don't have my Dutch oven. I couldn't fit in the car when I moved here. So the best element that I could find in this kitchen was this thing right here. This is a pizza steel that I bought like 2 years ago that I used to make pizzas on. But if you have a cast iron pan, you could use that as well. It's pretty much gonna be the same exact effect. But that only takes care of one element because we still don't have the steam. So you'll see how I take care of that in just a second. But what I'm gonna do is get this in the oven right now and preheat it at 500 degrees for at least 45 minutes until you really get that thing hot.
All right, so I just pulled these out of the fridge. They've been proofing overnight. And let's see if they pass the poke test. All right, see that? How it springs back but still leaves a little dent? If it springs all the way back, it's underproofed. And if it doesn't spring back at all, it's overproofed. So I'll show you again. Little spring back, but still leaves a dent. So this is just some parchment paper. Brush off some of the excess flour.
Since I don't have a bread lamb, I'm just going to use a sharp knife. Score it right down the middle. And then I'll take this pan, which is just a pan I wrapped in tin foil, some ice, which will slowly steam in there and help with the oven spring. Check that thing out. Pretty solid spring. So there should be a lot of steam released out of this oven when I open it if things were steamy in there. Whoa, there we go. And then what we'll do is we'll turn the oven down to 450 and cook it for another 20 minutes. 450, 20 minutes. And we'll cook that until the crust is nice and caramelized. All right, so overall, you know, a pretty good loaf. Not a perfect loaf, but I've got no baking equipment, and that was a fresh sourdough starter. I made that a week ago. So I'm happy with these results, and it's kind of funny. This reminds me a lot of the first video I ever made on sourdough. So I've come so long on my sourdough journey, but then you take away my supplies, and I go back a little bit, but this is still delicious bread. It just might not look like the prettiest bread I've ever made, but I'm fine with that in quarantine with none of my equipment. That's good bread. That's really good bread. Good crust,
Good crumb, super moist. I love bread. I really love bread.
So there you go. I hope you learned some good tips from this tutorial. Remember, if you want to download my bread baking schedules, there are 5 of them. So click the link right here for your free PDF downloads. This was actually very helpful for me today. It was nice using this. And this is just a guide. It's not exact. It says right here that there are variables. And when it comes to making sourdough bread, it's all about the variables and being in tune with your bread making, because this is fermentation and it's alive. So that's gonna do it. Please keep sending me your bread pictures at Life by Mike G, and I'll see you in the next video. I won't see you there. You know what I mean.